Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for Chamber University. We're going to give our participants a few more minutes just to get online and situated, and we will get moving shortly. Until then, you are free to use the chat box. And after the session with Mr. Lehman, we will open it up for Q&A. And if you have any questions in the meantime during the presentation, feel free to use your chat box and we will get started shortly. So give us just a few minutes and we'll be back. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us for Chamber University today. This is a program that we feature every month on relative topics. And with that being said, I'd like to thank our sponsor, Shakely, for allowing us to host this program. And also, I would like to introduce Mr. George Lehman with Bluffton University, and he is going to talk to us today about emotional intelligence. So thank you for being here today, George. We appreciate you being here and look forward to your program. He is going to share his screen and have conversation with you. And he also has access to the chat box, so I will be helping moderate that. So if you have any questions, feel free to type in the chat. And welcome, Mr. Lehman. And I'm going to turn it over to you now. Thank you.
Hi, it's good to be here. I understand there are about 40 of you here. Too bad I can't see all of you, but I'm looking forward to hearing your questions at the end or whenever they come in. Let me say a bit more about myself because this is about emotional intelligence, and knowing a bit more about me and what my experience is might be helpful to you in getting into the presentation. I've had sort of basically two careers in my life. My first part of my career was working at a large nonprofit mental health facility. It had a hospital, an outpatient clinic, and a strong education program. I was an administrator there, not a clinician. And somewhere after a successful career there, I decided I really wanted to shift into teaching. And so I had the chance to come to Bluffton, what was then Bluffton College, Bluffton University in 1994. I'd already earned an MBA at University of Pittsburgh by that time, but I was excited about having a chance to teach. I began teaching and soon decided I really wanted to get a doctorate. So I went to Case Western Reserve University on weekends. Some of you do classes and work at the same time. It's a challenge. And for 3 years, I burned the candle at both ends. While I was at Case Western, I interacted with the professors, some of whom have been very involved in developing the field of emotional intelligence. And so I learned about it from some of these gurus in the field and decided it intrigued me. And after I was finished my degree, I went on and got a certification in administering emotional intelligence tests and counseling with people and interpreting those, and primarily use that in the Bluffton MBA program. So I've been through the emotional intelligence material a number of times in Bluffton MBA programs, and I've been glad to see how much students appreciated it and worked with it. So this is a fun topic for me to work with. I'm also glad to be able to do it as part of Bluffton because Bluffton University sees emotional intelligence as an important initiative in its undergraduate programs and as a long-term aspect of its MBA programs. Okay, before I launch into sort of the theory here, let me tell you about a short conversation I had in a class with a grad student who in response to a question. That person is not from around here. It's not anybody you know, not an organization any of you know. I was talking about sort of what I thought excellent management looked like, and I have a particular perspective on that. And so I asked the question, when have you felt like you've been most productive in your life in the workplace? And one mid-career person, well-established manager, said we had a period of time about 2 years ago when I was part of a project group that was developing a new product for our organization, keeping that completely disguised, but we're developing a new product for our organization. And we had a leader for that group who was very focused, very clear where we were trying to go, had a strong sense of direction for it, had an important sense of timelines, and he was frankly a fairly significant taskmaster, but he made us all on his own target. And in a year, we had this product launch, and it was very, very productive. Sometimes a little hard to be around, but boy, it was productive. We got the job done. And I'll admit, I sort of paused because that wasn't quite the answer I was hoping for. You know, if you're a professor, you sometimes ask a question hoping for a particular kind of answer. Well, that wasn't the answer I was hoping for. And after pausing for a second, I said, well, how's that going now, a couple of years later? And the student said, oh, none of us are involved with the project anymore. We couldn't stand working under this kind of dictatorial leadership, and we all looked for other work in the organization because that was just burning us all out. I thought, that's interesting. The projects are successful, but all the participants decided they didn't want to be associated with anymore. I think in some ways that story illustrates the issue of emotional intelligence in the workplace. A person with a lot of skills, a lot of leadership ability, pulled off a project, but did so in a way that really meant there was no one left to give support to the project after he was done because his style of working had not resonated well with the people. So that's, in some ways, that's the kind of dilemma we're talking about here when we talk about emotional intelligence. So let me give a bit of background here first. The original theory and work on emotional intelligence was done in the 1980s. That's when it really became prominent. And it was done, the first researcher, major researcher, was a guy named Peter Salovey, S-A-L-O-V-E-Y, from Princeton, who's now president of Princeton. So it suggests that maybe he had some emotional intelligence himself. The first book that really took the field, brought the field to public attention was by a person named Daniel Goleman, associated with Harvard, who wrote Emotional Intelligence and Why It Matters More Than IQ. Notice the why it matters more than IQ, because emotional intelligence is often thought of, and by the people who developed it, as sort of an alternative to thinking about IQ. We'll talk about that. In the early 2000s, there were a lot of development of practical tools, inventories, workshops, training, other kind of things for the workplace. And it's actually just continued to grow since then. Emotional intelligence is now a fairly common topic. There's been ongoing research on the topic. I'm an academic, and so I look up our resource list, our electronic resource list of journal articles. There have been more than 3,000 articles published in the last 20 years examining various aspects of emotional intelligence. So it's gotten a lot of continuing attention. So I mentioned this question of emotional intelligence compared to IQ. So let me talk about that a little bit. Emotional intelligence, which sometimes is called EI, which is my preferred language, but also called EQ, it's the same thing, focuses on skills that can be developed. Throughout your life, you'll probably develop more emotional intelligence, and with practice and intention, you can develop it significantly, but it takes some work. That's compared to IQ, which most people tend to think of as being sort of set by the time you're in your late teens or something like that, and you sort of got what you've got. And I know that a lot of people sort of carry a weight through their life. I'm sort of one of the dumb ones, or I'm one of the smart ones, or whatever it is. We have a kind of image of our IQ, even if we don't know a number, that gives us some feeling about ourselves, and that sort of becomes part of our way we see ourselves. Emotional intelligence is something that can change and is not set like that. There's been work to measure emotional intelligence. The field has to have some of that, but it is not a field in which the key to the concept is measurement. It's more about understanding, reflection, and personal change. While in IQ, the focus is on measurement. Do you have an IQ of 110? Do you have an IQ of 120? Do you have an IQ of 90? What does that mean? How does it affect your life? So IQ, the number, is very important. There are a number of different emotional intelligence inventories, but none of them are ones where you say, okay, I got the right number, I'm good. That's not the focus on emotional intelligence. And as the title of the book in the last slide suggested, emotional intelligence is probably more beneficial as a predictor of long-term success in the workplace. How do I have what it takes to be good for the long haul, to have relationships that work well on an ongoing basis? IQ, on the other hand, tends to establish what we call a threshold competency. If I'm going to go into a particular field, I probably have to have some level of traditional intelligence to handle the work in that field. That may vary from field to field, but after I pass the threshold of that, more IQ doesn't necessarily make me a better worker. If a particular job seemed to need a slightly above average IQ, 110, 115, and I have an IQ of 150, which I don't think I do, although who knows. If I had 150 IQ, I wouldn't necessarily do that job any better than the person who had the threshold IQ of 110 or 115. Okay, so that's the difference between the two. We will focus most of our time here on emotional intelligence, but I wanted you to understand that because the language is similar and the concepts have their sort of interaction with each other. Okay, so what is emotional intelligence? Excuse me, my mouth gets dry here. Well, the starting point for understanding emotional intelligence is self-awareness. That's a common word. We thought you're self-aware. We all have some sense that we have some self-awareness. It sounds simple, but I like this quotation. Benjamin Franklin, writing in Poor Richard's Almanac way back in 1750, said there are three things extremely hard: steel, diamond, and to know oneself. Even longer ago than that, Greek philosophers, Plato, Socrates said, know thyself. And they were saying it as a challenge, a task to do that. So we're going to talk more about that, but recognize that the sort of the cornerstone of emotional intelligence is knowing yourself, and that's a little more complicated task than most of us think it is. So there's a lot of different definitions of emotional intelligence floating around. I've chosen to use one that fits sort of my understanding and is a kind of conglomeration of what a lot of other people have said. So I'll read it to you for you. Is understanding your emotions and those of others so that you can manage yourself and your relationships effectively. So understanding your emotions, your feelings, and those of others around you so that you can manage yourself and your relationships effectively. You know, in the illustration I gave to start the story out, my guess is that the person who was in charge of that project development, the product development team, didn't really pay a lot of attention to his emotions because he was charging ahead. And he certainly didn't pay attention to the emotions of others in the group. And that meant that he didn't establish the long-term team that was needed to be successful in the project. So that's what this is about. There's one real basic explanatory structure that's used very frequently to talk about what these skills are about. And it's the idea that emotional intelligence has four basic components. One is self-awareness, which we started talking about, and we'll say more. One is social awareness, awareness of what's going on around you. And then in the chart on the graph below self-awareness is self-management. It's one thing to know yourself. It's something else to say, how do I manage myself in the light of that knowledge? And in the same way, it's one thing to know what's going on with the group or being aware of what's happening to other people. And it's something different to manage those relationships. This last quadrant here is often the content of many, many managerial training, supervisory training programs. We won't focus on that so much today because it's often covered in other places. We'll talk about the other three in particular. Okay, those categories are broken down a little bit. The first one is self-awareness. We have to break that down. But self-management, we talk about an achievement orientation, adaptability, emotional self-control, and a positive outlook. And I'll get back to each of these. For the awareness of others, we talk about empathy and organizational awareness. And the five skills that are seen as part of managerial skills here are the ones we will not spend a lot of time on: conflict management, coaching, influencing, inspirational leadership, and teamwork. I will give one of those a little bit of a point here. When I was trained in emotional intelligence work, I took the fairly complicated surveys, and people around me gave those same surveys about me. And one of the things I found out was that while I thought I was being sort of appropriately hands-off with the members of my department in the business department of Bluffton and sort of letting them find their own way, they wished I provided more inspirational leadership. I needed to do more to give them some direction than the one that I was doing. And so for the next couple of years, I really worked hard to say, How do I provide the kind of leadership people feel like they need from me? So it's a very important learning experience. So let me talk about those now one by one a little bit. How do you develop increased self-awareness? Well, there's a variety of things people can do here. I've got some that I think are sort of the beginning point. One is learning to slow down enough to pay attention to yourself. I'm talking a little fast. I probably should slow down a bit more myself. But there are various practices that can help you pay attention to yourself. People get involved with meditation programs. My smartwatch will beep every about 4 or 5 times a day telling me, take 5 deep breaths, take a good in and out, it'll clear your brain. And then it praises me when I do that, or it says, you haven't done any deep breathing yet today. Well, that deep breathing, that sort of momentary break is a good way to sort of improve your ability to see yourself. It clears your mind, gets some of the clutter out. Other people will say religious devotion, prayer can be very helpful. Good friends of mine really love to take a walk every day, and that half-hour walk without headphones to get no less noise, but just to experience what's going on around them is an important part of their developing their self-awareness. So finding ways to unclutter your mind and be able to pay attention to what's happening around you and to yourself is an important part of developing self-awareness. A second thing is a funny one because it may not be one you think about. I would encourage all of you to take out a paper and pencil after we're done here and spend a little bit of time thinking about what do you really want from work, okay? What do you really want from the workplace? What we find is that people have very different needs from the workplace. Some people are looking primarily for the financial rewards to meet their financial needs. Other people are looking for companionship. Other people are looking for achievement. Other people are looking for stimulation. Other people are trying to avoid boredom. There's all kinds of reasons people work. But what we know is that when we find ourselves being riled up, it's often because one of those needs that we have that are legitimate is not being met. And interestingly, because we have different needs, people may experience the same situation quite differently. So a third kind of thing is simply learning to recognize that paying attention to emotions and feelings is not the same thing as acting reflexively. When we were younger, we would go on extended car trips all the way to the ocean, and we had preschool age kids, and that backseat could get a little rowdy sometimes. Then it would sort of calm down. My wife and I would try to get kids a little calmer. And what I noticed sometimes is after a period of being a little calm, but not very long, one would hit the other. And I'd say, what happened there? And my son would say, she looked at me, I had to hit her. Well, that's a good preschool kind of behavior. But the reality is that many of us sort of see, they did that, I had to respond in a certain kind of way. We don't have the awareness to say, no, I have a choice about that. That old maxim, count to 10, makes all kinds of sense, maybe even a little longer sometimes, because counting to 10 can help you clear your head and say, what's really going on with me? What am I aware of within myself at this point in time? So those are tips, the way to think about increase your self-awareness. And the people who've studied emotional intelligence a long time have said that self-awareness, being able to pay attention to what's going on with myself and get an accurate picture of myself, is key to the others. It's going to be hard to be an effective leader if you don't have self-awareness. So, okay, so what's self-management about? There were 4 points in this. I want to pick out a couple here that are specific to our situation. One is learn to be your own motivator. A lot of workplace activity is generated towards being how to create motivation. Who's the motivational leader? What are the rewards and incentives we need to have around here? Those all have their place, but they tend to wear out. I had a friend who was a high-level executive in the insurance industry, and he talked about how they incentivize salespeople. And he said, every year we have to change the incentives because after a while, people figure out how to game them and they don't really work well anymore. Well, I would say that the task is to say, how do you develop internal motivation rather than being only externally focused? And the emotionally intelligent person brings their own motivation to the workplace rather than saying, what are you going to do to get me motivated? So that's one. Second one is what I touched on before, is recognizing we have a choice about how we handle our emotions. And that's sort of related to recognizing that our situation, people's different situations are very different. So for example, if I'm part of a work group and I'm one of the hourly workers in the group, and I'm told that we're gonna have to work 10 hours overtime the next 2 weeks because of a major task that needs to get done. If I'm very worked on my needs, figured out what they are, and I'm really needing the additional revenue right now, that's good news. I'm going to get a time and a half pay for my salary is going to go up nicely here. That feels like a pretty good thing. If on the other hand, my primary motivation is sort of sociability and affiliation in the workplace, and I have a lot of commitment to family activities, 10 hours a week, I'm saying, I am not at all excited about that. Well, if we recognize that different people have different responses to the same situation, we can choose what to do with our emotions. A third point is to avoid letting your interpretations of other people's motives determine your reaction. Let's say you're part of a group that's worked on a project for a number of months. You've had some tough committee meetings. You've tried to solve the problems with that, and you're making a presentation to your management team. And some members of your work group are with you. And you're right in the middle of a point, and when somebody in your group says, no, I don't think that's the way we decided it. Maybe with a little nastier voice, that's not the way we decided it. Okay, I can interpret that person's behaviors in a lot of different ways. They feel like I missed something. They are trying to undermine me. They want some credit themselves. I can create all kinds of things that say this person's doing some nasty stuff. I'm irritated with them. Don't do that. Find a way to say, okay, they may have done that for whatever kind of reasons, but right now my task is to respond as calmly and clearly to that interruption as possible. I could say, I thought we'd covered that before. Could we talk about it after the meeting? Or you could say, well, that's an interesting point. Let me clarify it. Maybe I wasn't clear about why we were suggesting that. Maybe it would be, did I hear your question right? Did you were saying so-and-so, I want to make sure I'm understanding you. Those are all very different reactions. And none of them require you to say, well, that person is ugly and mean and trying to undermine me, and I'm going to get them back. That's likely not going to help you in self-management. A fourth thing that I would say about self-management is it's really beneficial to find a trusted person to help you think about your options, a little bit like I just did there, rather than seeing somebody to vent to. Now, we all have situations that make us frustrated and angry. This is tax time. I've had my own experiences the last week about that, where I've come home and I once said to my wife, don't talk to me, I'm ready to bite off somebody's head, I'm so frustrated. But we at least had that bit of a conversation rather than me biting off her head. Wouldn't taste that good anyhow. Find a trusted person to help you think about your options rather than primarily venting. What psychologists and others have learned is that venting creates some short-term relief, but unless it leads to more creative thinking, it doesn't really do much. It's sort of like having a drink. It may help you feel less anxious, but it isn't really a good long-term solution to your problems. A drink of alcohol. What you need is somebody who can help you think, boy, that was a difficult situation. What did you consider doing differently? What do you think might have preceded that? Is there something that happened that caused this situation to develop? What are the options you'd like to have explored? Is there something you wish you'd done differently? It's not somebody saying you ought to have done this. It's not a lot of advice giving, but it's helping you think about options. And all of those really can improve your own sense of self-management. So those are ways to work on self-management. Okay, the last one that we're going to talk about today is sort of empathy and organizational awareness. Here again, we have long-standing old advice. Listen to other people first. Seek to understand before you seek to be understood. That's a better way to say that, but pay attention to understanding other people first. We all want people to understand what we're saying, but our key task in most situations is to understand first. If we don't really understand first, we won't be able to give our explanation and our understanding in ways that communicate well with people. So making your goal to be able to come out of a meeting or an interaction where you can describe in a neutral tone what you heard somebody else saying. It's harder than you think. often we, and professors are particularly guilty of this, ask a question and are really waiting to give our next response, our answer before, rather than listening to the answer. And that's true in the workplace overall. Secondly, is just to learn to observe people, note body language, facial expression. When we're in a mask environment, that's more difficult, but when we're like this, we can say, okay, what are people really communicating with their body? Are they fidgeting around like this? Are they back at their chair like this? Or are they like this, actively engaged? Is their voice a cheerful, happy voice? Or is it, well, I hope we get this problem solved kind of voice? But learn to pay attention to that and note it and do it well. A third point is to ask, how are we doing, in a way that suggests you're actually interested in hearing. How are you is a question we answer fine, but to ask somebody, I saw that this meeting was a little tough for you. How are you doing at this point? Or I heard you had an issue at home that like this. How's that working out for you? Asking questions that really suggest you are interested in hearing the answer rather than asking questions that imply a kind of perfunctory, quick response. After a meeting, ask yourself, how do I understand what's going on there, rather than why didn't I get my way? How do I think about what's going on analytically? Well, those are 3 different areas of emotional intelligence, all of which you can work on with practice and discipline. And I'm clear for myself and from people I know that with time, we are able to develop ourselves quite a bit more in the area of emotional intelligence. That sort of ends my formal presentation. Bluffton has some thoughts about some of that. I think Shelby Koenig, who's here, is going to speak at some point, but I'm also ready to take some questions. So I'll let somebody else sort of manage this from here. Nicole, I'll turn it back to you. And you can introduce Shelby as you wish.
Thank you, Doctor. I appreciate it. This was very interesting information. I think that we tend to forget about ourself and our awareness of ourself quite often. And I really appreciate I appreciate the information that you provided today. And with that being said, I know questions will open up here in just a few minutes, but Shelby, I'm interested in knowing if I want to know more information about emotional intelligence, how do I get involved with that?
Yes, thank you, Nicole, and George as well. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Yes, so we have a corporate education and church partnership program. So what this is we partner with area school districts, community colleges, area businesses, and churches to offer all of their employees, their spouses, and dependents a 20% tuition discount off of any of our programs. I'd like to make a little bit of a shout out. I saw Jonathan Lewis on the call here. Lewis Family McDonald's is one of our partners, and I'd like to make some other shout outs to our current corporate partners are Wanamaker Total Logistics, Crown Equipment, Owens Community College, Stolly Insurance, the Union Bank, HCF Management, Northwest State, North Star Blue Scope, Auto Owners, Lima Memorial, Lewis Family McDonald's, and Mennonite Memorial Home. So as you can see, those are a lot of Lima-based institutions, and all of their employees, spouses, and dependents can come to Bluffton for any of our programs. Our current education partners include Bluffton Schools, Lima City, Riverdale, Allen East, Shawnee, Ada, Kenton, Ben Logan, and Elida Schools. We just kicked off the church partnership this week, and I've had various conversations with many churches. So the Corporate and Education and Church Partnership Program is a value add opportunity alongside the organization's existing benefits program. It's 150 employees or more on the corporate side, education as well, and then church, it's 70 plus members. So if anyone on this call or anyone that you know, please don't hesitate to reach out. My contact information is listed on the screen if you'd like to have a conversation. And then also another plug is that if you or someone that you know is interested in any of our undergraduate degree completion or graduate programs, I am the recruiter for the graduate programs, and I can assist with any questions regarding that. I am personally in the 22-month MBA program here at Bluffton, and I just recently have learned about emotional intelligence, and it's a really hot topic here on campus, and George has done a great job explaining what that is, and hopefully those of you want to join in any of our programs, don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you, Shelby. Appreciate the information on how we can continue to learn a little bit more about emotional intelligence. And if you have any questions for Mr. Lehman, please go ahead and submit those in the chat box. Otherwise, uh, I can provide his contact information where you could reach him or Shelby with more information if you don't feel comfortable asking questions here online today, which is completely fine. But with that being said, I'll give you a few seconds to go ahead and type some questions in there. Once again, I would like to thank Bluffton University for providing Mr. Lehman the ability to be able to provide this to us today. It has been recorded, and you will receive a copy of the recording afterwards within 48 hours. And also, we would like to thank Shakely once again for providing this program to our business community. And if I'm not seeing any questions coming in, but Mr. Lehman, Alan Leopard wanted to say hi, and Megan Morris also said hi.
Good.
So, you're free to reach out to them as well online here.
Well, it's always good to see people who I've had contact with in the past showing up here. So thank you. Good to see that. My contact information is layman.g@bluffton.edu. It's sort of like what you see for Shelby, just the last name, first name, no spaces, @bluffton.edu.
Thank you, Mr. Lehman. I put that in the chat box for everybody as well. And with that, I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon and hope to see you again next month. Thank you very much and have a great day.